All rise for the jury. You may be seated, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, we'll continue with cross-examination. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sorry, Detective Hughes. So now, let me ask you again, can you recall during your investigation if you had any video of Anthony parting in, and so that there's no confusion, could I see I-17? And that's just a picture of the car. I think I-17 is the actual.
No.
That one will work. Thank you, yes. If I may, use the elbow, Your Honor. If I may approach the witness.
Yes, you may.
Detective Hughes, can you identify what's in the state's exhibit?
That would
and
be
this is I-1.
The vehicle that Mr. Parton was arrested out of.
Okay. And so there's no confusion as to what vehicle I'm referring to. And I think you're referring to this vehicle as the vehicle that Anthony Parton was arrested in, is that correct?
Yes.
And I was asking you, do you have any video of him driving that vehicle?
This particular video or vehicle, no.
Okay. Were you present when Anthony Parton was arrested?
No, sir.
Do you know where he was when he was arrested?
He just left his the residence on East 15th.
Was he in front of that residence?
They observed him getting in the vehicle and pulling away from it.
Okay. And that was the vehicle I was asking you, did you do any DNA testing on?
No, sir.
Earlier in your testimony, you talked about you were looking for the results of an autopsy, and you had talked to the pathologist in this case, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And when you talked to the pathologist in this case, you had some concerns in terms of a murder weapon or the way Rachael died, is that correct?
Yes.
And that was one of your leading concerns, was trying to find the weapon used in her death, is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe that's when you indicated that you had instructed BCI, and I mean probably Agent Durst and whoever's worked with him, and maybe even yourself, checking the apartment to find a knife.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And everybody was focused in on finding that knife. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, when that vehicle that we just seen in State Exhibit I-1, do you know if a knife was found in that vehicle?
Oh, I don't recall if there was or not. There was a lot of evidence taken out of that car, or a lot of items photographed and taken out of that car.
If there was a knife in that vehicle, you would assume that as part of this investigation, you would have that knife tested, wouldn't you?
If I thought it was, yes.
In other words, you don't test to make sure if it's what you think. If I think it does, fine. If I don't test it. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And is that the same way with the other knives that were found in Rachel's apartment?
Which knife are you referring to?
There was a block of knives, but in particular, there was a knife that was found upstairs in her bedroom. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Was that knife tested?
I don't believe so.
There was a razor knife also found up there. Was that knife inspected and tested?
No, sir.
Not for DNA, not for fingerprints, not for anything?
No, I don't believe so.
I believe you told these folks, and you got plenty of experience, working 10 years in robbery, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you know about credit card usage, don't you?
Yes, sir.
And in your position as a robbery detective, you know how people use stolen credit cards, right?
That's correct.
And tell the members of the jury, a lot of times if a person is in possession of a stolen credit card, that doesn't mean they stole it, does it?
Not always.
You did a lot of surveillance video, is that correct? I mean, you retrieved a lot
Yes,
of
sir.
surveillance video.
Yes.
And there were a lot of different camera angles, weren't there?
Yes.
And we didn't want to show all of them for the jury because some of them didn't really involve anything.
That's correct.
And you picked out the ones that you felt were pretty important. Is that
Yes.
correct? Now, one of the videos that was of particular concern, and maybe you can help us, was the one where you saw Rachael Anderson's vehicle.
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were trying your hardest to kind of determine who was involved or who was in that vehicle.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And you had that vehicle tested for DNA,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And as a result of the DNA testing, Anthony Parton's DNA was not in that vehicle, was it?
That's correct.
And I think you pointed out to the members of the jury on the video, you saw a hand come out the vehicle and wipe.
You see a hand coming out wiping? Yes.
Yeah, and what was it wiping?
The side of the car.
So you think that if a person is wiping with a bare hand, they look bare to you?
I couldn't tell if he had anything in his hand or not.
But if they were wiping the car with a bare hand, would that make sense to you?
Would there have been DNA? Yeah, there would have been if he was using his bare hand.
So they would be leaving more DNA than they're wiping off, wouldn't they?
Well, yeah.
But needless to say, through the course of your investigation, you have nothing that could have connected Anthony Parton to Rachael Anderson's car. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You interviewed Anthony Sleet,
Yes, I did.
and he was cooperative, is that correct?
Yes.
And he gave a description of the person who he got a credit card from, is that correct?
Yes.
And you thought it might have been a little more than that because of the amount of time that these particular individuals were together, is that correct?
Yes.
And I think you indicated that they were together almost 2 hours.
They were together quite a while.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Because you was timing it as you were putting things together.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm not going to say, but the video kind of speaks for itself in terms of what Anthony said to you, his descriptions, all of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
He indicated that he was at R&M Market and that he met with the guy out there and there could have been or should have been a video of that meeting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you try to get a video from that?
Yes, I did.
And what were the results? What happened? Why couldn't you get a video from
It's
that?
already cycled through. It's like whatever their time cycle is already cycled through and erased itself.
Okay.
And that was on February 6th. I interviewed Mr. Sleet.
But you were able to get the one from that same day, that same night,
Yes,
right? January 29th,
yes,
a few minutes later. Is that correct?
a few minutes later.
Well, how much longer from the time he told you he met with the guy who came out the store and you see him getting out the car on January 29th? I think it was 9:22.
Well, from the time that we had, we're going from the time to the credit card usage.
I'm sorry?
So we're basing that on the credit card usage, the time that we obtained the first video. When I received information from Mr. Sleet that Mr. Pardon was there at a different time, I sent an evidence tech back out there and found out at that time it had already been cycled through and erased.
That's what I'm saying, so the members
Yes.
of the jury can understand.
Mr. Thomas.
I'm sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take about a 5-minute break. Okay, again, remember the admonitions that I've given you. All right? All rise. Let's just take 5. One of the jurors got my attention that needed to get out.
Oh, thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
We were all wondering what happened.
No. Stretch.
Another request.
All right, Mrs. Harper. All rise for the jury. All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. You may be seated. Thank you, Ms. Harper. Mr. Thomas, may I inquire?
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Hughes, I must apologize to you and to the court reporter, Carla. I need to let you finish your answer, so I get up here, maybe too much sugar, but I'm gonna slow down, apologize to both of y'all. Let me let you complete your answer before I start again.
Okay.
What I was asking, I believe, was in terms of the video and the first time that the bank card was used and that you were able to retrieve a video from that store from a transaction on January 29th
Yes.
of 2018. And my question is, you received a video from that time which shows, I think the members of the jury saw some of it, where Rachel's car comes into the scene. Anthony Sleet gets out the passenger side and goes in for the first time that the video was used. I mean, that her credit card was used, and that would have been at 9-something o'clock on, I believe, January the 28th. Is that correct? I said 29th, but I mean,
28th.
I think the first one was January 28th. And my question was, just so I understand, once you received that video from that day, is it your testimony that you only requested it for a certain particular time and not for the whole day or not for a couple hours?
Yeah, just for the time the card was used.
And I think at that point, do you know what day you requested to go out and see that? Was that to get that video?
It was the same day that I received information from Nikki Morris. I'm sorry, Nikki Morris from PNC Bank. I can't, I mean, I'm guessing maybe February 1st, something like that.
Okay. So you went out probably around the first day of February or something like that. And my question is, from your initial investigation, how long had you thought that Rachael Anderson had not been heard from?
Well, I mean, from the investigation telling us that on the 28th, we got the times where she last spoke to, I believe it was her mother. It was, I'm guessing maybe 6 o'clock that night.
Okay.
Without
So
having
you
the
wouldn't have, I'm sorry.
Is
I
that
did it again.
without having the records in front of me, I can't answer that correctly.
Okay, so you thought it was not prudent to get the records or the video from 6:30 when she wasn't talking until the end of that day?
No.
Okay. Looking back in hindsight, had you done that, we could probably have had the person who gave Anthony Sleep the credit card on that video.
Possibly.
I think you indicated that when you did your walkthrough and after you talked to the investigators, you determined that the only thing missing from the apartment was a debit card. Is that correct? Was that your testimony?
It was a debit card that we know that was missing, other than her keys.
So it's the keys and the debit card.
Yes.
What about jar of marijuana? Did you hear anything about that?
I know there was marijuana usage, but I have no idea what she had in the apartment prior to that.
Okay. On the January 28th, on the videos that you had, or surveillance videos, was it always one person using the debit card?
Yes.
You talked about canvassing the neighborhood, is that correct?
Yes.
And did you do that personally, or did you send other officers?
Other detectives.
Okay. Do you know if Rachel's neighbors have been questioned by Columbus Police?
I know they were talked to. As a matter of fact, the new tenant in apartment C, we traced down, hadn't moved in yet, and we spoke, Detective Welsh and myself both spoke to her.
Okay. So you and Detective Welch spoke to the neighbor that would have been in
C,
C.
yes, she hadn't moved in yet.
What about the neighbors that were in A?
I know somebody spoke to him.
Would there be a record of that interview if that occurred?
Could have been, yeah, they should have been if they canvassed the area.
Were you aware if there have been any complaints or any charges filed for any drugs being located in that apartment? Unit A, 30?
No, drugs in there? I have
Yeah.
no idea.
It would have been important to talk to those folks to see if they heard anything or saw anything strange. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you given any leads as far as any other people being out there around the time this homicide occurred?
No.
Were you able to determine if Rachel was out in the neighborhood, if she socialized with any of the other neighbors?
The statement given from Allison Gamble just said that she spoke to her a couple times, but she never said she was friendly anytime she had contact with her.
Was she hanging with any of the other neighbors out there that you know of besides the conversation you had with Allison?
No, that, nothing like that ever came up.
Would that have been important? Is that something you want to know?
If it came up in the canvas, yes.
The photo that was shown, the still from the Rice Center, I think that's L2. Do you know when that was taken?
When the surveillance was taken, it would have been the 29th of January.
The surveillance still that we show, which is L2.
When the actual still was taken,
When Anthony Parton was allegedly at the Rice Center, what day was that?
January 29th,
That was January 29th?
yes.
Do you know what time that was?
Right offhand, no, I think it was in the morning. I believe it was in the AM. Without seeing it in front of me, I can't say for certain.
You got the results of the DNA on Rachel's vehicle. Was Anthony Sleet's DNA in that vehicle?
In the vehicle, I don't believe so.
I'm sorry?
I don't believe so.
So Anthony Sleet, who you clearly saw getting in and out of that vehicle, no DNA.
No.
When you got the results of the DNA, on Anthony Parton was, I guess you already said, his DNA wasn't in the vehicle, right?
No.
Okay. I want to show, can I see State Exhibit 2? That's that overall map of the home. Yeah, that's second. That's Z. No wonder I can't find it.
I have Z.
You have Z?
Z?
Yes. Thank
You
you.
said 2?
Yes.
Doug said 2. I'm sorry.
No, I'm not used to it. Okay, please. Detective Hughes, can you help us out a little bit in using your pointer on this?
Certainly.
So, show the members of the jury again, where was Rachael Anderson's apartment?
Right here. Sorry. Try not to shake so much.
Right there?
Right there.
And show them where her car was found. Everybody ever see that? So her car was found around the corner from her apartment.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And show the members of the jury again where Benita Anderson's apartment was.
Right here.
So the jurors are clear, you talked about a clear line of sight. Where were you standing that you got this clear line of sight where you could see through the apartments to, and just draw a line so we could see that
Right here.
clear line of sight?
There's windows back for apartment. It goes right through here,
And where would her back door be?
right here.
Okay, we got a picture of that, right?
Back door, should be.
Yeah. And so you were in her apartment or standing outside the apartment building?
I was standing right behind 3070 Allegheny Avenue.
Now, that's what I'm saying. Were you standing inside her apartment with this? Or are you saying somebody could be standing outside of her apartment? And if they stood outside and positioned themselves properly, they could get a view through these apartments and without any trees or any obstruction or anything like that.
What I'm saying from the rear of 370,
Sure,
I could
hear what you're talking about. I'm just asking.
saying from back of 370, which is the rear.
Where's that?
Right here.
Okay, from there.
You can see there's a clear shot to the back of the apartment.
Okay. Now, Judge, thank you very much. Well, you were able to determine, first of all, what time were you able to find Miss Anderson's car?
What time?
Do you know?
It had been the time that we were out there for the homicide. It had been shortly after we arrived at the scene.
Because shortly after you arrived at the scene, some witness had already said that they had been out there, her car was parked on that side, right?
Okay?
Is that correct? Or do you know?
I don't know for sure, no.
And you don't know how long the car had been sitting there, based on the fact that it was used, according to the video, sometime around 9.
Yes.
Is that the only video you have of the car being used?
Yes.
And, let me see. Had you noticed that it had snowed that day when you were out there?
It was snowing while we were there.
It was snowing.
Yes.
Were any tracks leading to that vehicle, away from that vehicle?
If I remember correctly, it just started snowing at that time. So I don't think there was accumulation. I don't recall of any tracks leading or going away or from it, or to it.
Oh, sorry, Your Honor. Could I see your D1 through D19? Those are photographs of Rachel's car. Let's see if there was one of them down in front of the car. Yeah, you have to post up with this one. Just let me look at this. I usually don't go for a minute.
You may.
Detective Hughes, now that's, identify that for me. What is that a picture of?
That'd be Rachael Anderson's vehicle.
And snow has already accumulated on top of it?
That pretty much happened while we were there. It was accumulating as we arrived, right as we got to the scene and as as the night progressed.
Okay.
So we got it out of the scene fairly quick just for that reason.
Okay, so I don't see any snow accumulating on the ground. It's snowing at that time, is that correct?
It began to while we were there.
Again, I think your testimony is that you didn't see any tracks leading to that vehicle or from that vehicle? John, can I have a minute?
You may. Yes, you may.
Detective, you have seen photos of this car where it was there, and you see the portion that's underneath that was dry, right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know who took these photos?
I believe that would have been one of our crime scene guys, Brad Morrow, not BCI, because we took the car out of the scene because of the snow, and he was already there initially before we decided to fully use BCI for the interior scene.
Okay.
So we removed the car just for that reason, to get it out there and document where it was so we get it inside a dry and warm facility.
Were you the person responsible for telling BCI what items you wanted collected? Was that your responsibility at that time, or was that Detective Welch's?
Oh, I would have been the scene detective, but we were both there.
Who was responsible for, the walkthrough? So when Agent Durst,
It'd been my
yours?
responsibility to walk through the BCI agents.
and whose responsibility is it to decide what items are tested and for what?
At that time would have been Detective Welch.
And you put in a lab request, and you tell the lab what you want done?
Yes.
And basically, what other part did you have in this investigation
What other parts?
that we haven't talked about today?
What we have talked about, I think we covered pretty much everything.
So that's as much as you had to do with this investigation?
I believe we covered everything.
Okay. Your Honor, could I have 1 minute, please?
You may.
I believe you indicated that you had already called the number that Anthony Sleet gave you, is that correct?
The look for him?
Yeah.
At that time, I would have, yes.
And did he kind of tell you what area he was hanging out in and all that?
Yes.
And he wasn't around?
I contacted Whitehall and the officers that work that area to be on the lookout for him.
And I'm sorry.
So if I recall, he resided sometimes in Jackson, if I recall, during the interview. But no, I couldn't find him.
Okay. And so that we understand in terms of time, you interviewed Sleet on February 6th.
Yes,
You arrested Anthony Pardon on February 8th.
yes.
And since February the 8th, as far as you were concerned, Mr. Sleet was not available.
Yes. I still have ID alerts on people from a couple years ago I haven't been contacted with yet.
And I think it was your testimony that upon closer check, he didn't die or pass away until September or something like that, August,
Yes.
something like that?
Yes.
You requested a DNA sample from, I believe, Rachael Anderson, is that correct?
Yes.
And I believe you collected a DNA sample from, was it Deborah Park?
Yes.
And John Kennedy Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you collect a DNA sample from Tina Kennedy?
No.
The dates and times that you requested the different DNA samples are written on the actual exhibits, aren't they?
They should be.
Okay. Detective Hughes, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Hughes, why didn't you request Tina Kennedy's DNA?
I didn't think it was pertinent to have it.
Did you have any information that she had been there on the 28th, or I'm sorry, the 29th, when Rachel's body had been found?
The day that it was found, no, she
Okay.
wasn't there.
And you mentioned that Mr. Sleet died in, I think Mr. Thomas asked you, August or September. What year?
2018.
Okay. The same year you interviewed him?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas was questioning you about whether or not Mr. Sleet's DNA was in Rachel's car.
Yes.
Did you observe Mr. Sleet get out of her car?
Yes.
In the investigations that you have done, have you seen that happen where people touch things or are places and do not leave their DNA?
Yes.
And the opposite is true. People can touch things or be places and leave their DNA.
Yes.
Mr. Thomas was asking you about that video where somebody in Rachel's car wipes the handle.
Yes.
And he asked you about, well, that would leave more DNA, right?
If it was a bare hand, yeah.
Okay. You said if it was a bare hand.
Yes.
What if it was not a bare hand?
No, it wouldn't leave any DNA.
Okay. And in your training and your experience, why was that relevant to you?
Somebody wiping away evidence, attempting to wipe away possible fingerprints,
Or DNA?
possible DNA, any evidence of identification.
And just so we're clear, Detective Welsh was the primary for a couple of days.
Yes.
And then it became your investigation.
Yes.
And when Detective Welsh came back from vacation, did he become the primary again?
No.
It stayed your investigation?
Yes.
And as the primary, were you then responsible for reviewing the information that had been collected before and then after you became the primary?
Yes.
And was some of that information that Detective Howe had put together from the Google records?
Yes.
And Mr. Thomas asked about any evidence of the defendant being in Rachel's car, right?
Yes.
His DNA's not in there, right?
That's correct.
The date and time on that surveillance when we see the car come up.
Yes.
Did Detective Howe identify the defendant's phone at that same location at the same time?
All right, please approach. Excuse us, ladies and gentlemen. The objection is sustained. You may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Thomas asked you about whether or not other knives that were recovered were tested. The utility knife from her drawer, the steak knife from the drawer, and the knife recovered from the vehicle the defendant was in. Did any of those knives appear to have any visible hair or blood on them?
No.
Mr. Thomas asked you about after his client had been arrested, there was no need to, you didn't investigate anymore. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Had you received the information from the Columbus Police Department Crime Lab before you arrested the defendant?
Yeah, that day.
Okay. And they're going to come in and tell us what they found, but was that evidence, in your training and your experience, was there any need to conduct any additional investigation after those results?
No.
Did you also then still continue to get other information related to the defendant, like the Google records, even after that, though?
Yes.
Could I have one moment, please?
You may.
If I may, Your Honor.
You may.
There were some questions about getting the surveillance video and how you chose to do that. Can you explain to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you decided or what the method was for you selecting or looking for specific areas of surveillance or times?
That was all based on the debit card usage at that location.
And is that, was that something you would also do during your time as a robbery detective?
Yes.
And the manner in which you did it, is that what, is that something that you used regularly, both as a robbery and a homicide detective?
Yes.
When did you, okay, I think you said you thought you got the initial surveillance for the 28th, maybe around February 1st or something like that. You
Yeah, it
thought.
was, yeah, right around that time,
Okay. And when did you interview Anthony Sleet?
February 6th.
Okay. So when you got the information on February 1st for surveillance, what timeframes were you looking at?
The times of the robbery, I'm sorry, the debit card usage.
Not a robbery detective anymore.
No, no.
Okay. So the times of the debit card usage.
Yes.
Was the information that Mr. Sleet was giving you on February 6th, the timing for when he got the card, the same time as a transaction?
No.
So by February 6th, after February 6th, when he told you, hey, there should be video of the guy giving me the card, did you attempt to go get that video?
Yes, that's why I broke away during the interview, is to get a hold of our evidence tech and have her go out there immediately in an attempt to recover it.
Okay, so one of those breaks when we shortened it for time for the jury.
Yes.
So explain to us what you did?
I made contact with one of our evidence techs and sent her out there to try to obtain that video at that time, which it had been too late. It's already cycled through.
And when you say cycled through, what do you mean?
Different machines. Some cycle every 24 hours, some cycle every week, some cycle every month. It depends on the machine itself. It erases itself and starts it over again.
But you attempted to do that immediately, though?
Yes,
Didn't even finish the interview with Mr. Sleet?
that's correct.
Okay. Could I have one moment, please?
You may.
Nothing further, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rouse. Recross?
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective Hughes, how long have you been a detective?
Since 2004.
Since 2004?
Yes.
And so when Ms. Rouse was asking you about what you were able to see, you know, since 2004, there's a lot of evidence that the naked eye can't see, isn't it?
That's referring to,
Well, let me ask you. You don't see my DNA, do you?
no.
There's a lot of evidence that you need a scientist to actually look out before you can determine whether it's there or not, right?
Sure.
And that's what an experienced detective does. You don't take it for granted that, oh, well, you know what? I don't see no fingerprints here, so I'm not gonna look for them. That's why you have experts, is that correct?
Yes.
Now, you indicated after February the 8th when you arrested Anthony Parker. So the members of the jury are clear. Every other part of an investigation you conducted was to get evidence to convict Anthony Parker, wasn't it?
The evidence obtained, yes.
Right. You weren't trying to get no evidence that leads you away from the conviction of Anthony Parker, were you?
Everything was towards Mr. Pardon.
Yes. And we know you didn't get the surveillance. We don't have it. But hindsight being 2020, don't you wish you would have gotten that the first time instead of just looking at that one particular few minutes?
There's a lot of woulda, shoulda, couldas.
Right.
Yeah.
When you would have liked if Dad had that,
Oh,
right?
I'd loved to have had it.
Okay. And you knew that Rachel had last been heard of on January 28th around 6:30 p.m., is that correct?
Well, like I said, without reviewing the documents out in front of me, I can't say the exact time, but I believe just from memory, that's about the time it was.
You were you showed a juror scene some overlays of when this credit card was used.
Yes,
Is that right?
yes,
And all the spots that it was used.
yes,
And there's several times listed on when these credit cards was used. Is that correct?
yes,
And when you would order the videos, they would a lot of times cover more times than that. Time leading up to that, is that correct?
yes.
Thank you, Detective Hughes, again. Nothing further.
Thank you. All right, Detective, you can step down. You're not to discuss your testimony with anyone while this case is still pending.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, as I had indicated to you previously, we will not be in court tomorrow. Okay, so you get the day off, at least from here. I don't know if you need to go into work or anything like that, but that's between you and your employer. Well, I'm sure all of you probably know what my concern is. Now you have 3 days in which to think about and not talk about the case with anyone. Again, it's extremely important. There's going to be news reports. People are going to be reading news reports, watching news reports, getting information offline, and invariably commenting upon what they have read or viewed. And again, it's important that you not talk with anyone about the case, allow anyone to talk with you about the case. You've gotten certain information about locations and things of that sort. You're not to conduct your own investigation as well. It is my hope that you will think about anything other than this case over the weekend, because ultimately you will have an opportunity, obviously, to begin discussing with the other jurors your thoughts, and it would be premature for you to do that at this point. So I'm hoping, one, I mean, it's been a long week for you, put in a lot of work, that the weekend will give you time to just kind of decompress a little bit and relax and think about something else. So please, need you here again before 9 a.m. on Monday. We'll get started as close to that time as we can. Please have a safe trip home tonight, a safe trip back tomorrow, a safe trip back on Monday. All right. All rise for the jury. All right, very good, everyone. See counsel on Monday. I'll be looking out for the proposed instructions from either side. And we can at least begin the discussion at some point in time next week. All right, everyone have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Your Honor.